I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
You knew what I saw you the other 2 weeks ago. MRP, yeah.
I missed Stephanie. Gotta be. I mean, I find him extremely influential.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Sonic Lab. You're all very welcome this evening. We kindly ask you to switch off all your mobile phones. In the unlikely event of an emergency, we have a fire escape to the front left of the stage and at the back, at the door you came in. We'd now ask you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the proceedings.
Good evening, everyone. It's hard to compete with that soothing cinematic voice, but I'll do my best. Thank you, Johnny. It's great to be here. My name is Mathilde Medelus, and I'm a sound artist and a researcher. And SARC is like my second home. I am absolutely thrilled to be here and introduce Professor Franziska Schroeder, inaugural lecture. I met Franziska 12 years ago at SARC, but I came to know her 2 years later when we were both in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And Rio is an intense place where wonderful and abominable coexist with the same vigor. So experiencing Rio fully makes us see things and experience things differently. So I was in Rio for 3 months on a research residency while Franziska was on a research sabbatical doing an ethnographic study on music improvisation in Brazil. And although we would at times talk about research, I got to know Franziska mostly as a supportive human and a parent. And later in 2018, I had the opportunity to briefly work with her closely on a postdoctoral research fellow position on her long-lasting project, Performance Without Barriers. It's great to see that there's many of us here. And through this project, I met an incredible group of people doing really, really important work collaboratively with real world impact. So for those who know her, her energy is difficult to match. I tried and failed many times. Her path in life is an indicator of her adaptability, endless curiosity, and her true spirit as an improviser. She was born in a divided Berlin when the wall separated East from West. She lived in a commune in Australia in the 90s, and in the meantime, she also graduated on top of her class and got a university medal. She received a PhD in music philosophy from Edinburgh and moved to Belfast to work at SARC. She's fluent in German, French, English, and Portuguese. And due to her recent work in Vietnam, she's challenging herself to also tackle Vietnamese. And as we know, speaking a language is a process that involves adapting to a new mindset and culture. Beyond simply learning words, structure, and grammar, it requires one to tap into and acknowledge the existence of one's own multiple others. Ideas that will return on Franziska's talk in a minute. As I understand it, part of a researcher's job is to pose difficult questions, a pursuit that might seem absurd at times and not entirely tangible, but can have an impact on many. And Franziska's work does embody this. Her path and research are multifaceted, but incredibly coherent and impactful, evidenced by her internationally recognized works in areas such as network performance, multiple arts and humanities research grants, alongside invitations to major international festivals, including Brazil, France, Australia, and Germany. Franziska's work is deeply influenced by a Portuguese poet. By the way, just in case you don't know or haven't noticed, I am Portuguese. So Fernando Pessoa, whose work she has researched for a number of years and continues to research. Franziska is particularly interested in his book, O Livro do Desassossego, translated into English as The Book of Disquiet. The book has gradually emerged as a study in solitude, dreaming, creativity, alienation, and the destruction of the I. In her own academic writings, Franziska reminds us of the convergence between Deleuze and Pessoa. And to quote, as they both envisage to abolish ideas of metaphysical transcendence and instead aim to think and celebrate notions of immanence. Franziska's artistic research is entangled in Pessoa's concepts of externalizing yourself, offering yourself, beginnings and endings, the notion of becoming other. Endlessly open to the unexpected, she has seeded these ideas across many of her projects as an academic, a saxophonist, and as an improviser. And in doing so, she continuously stretches our understandings of what performance can be, what collaboration can mean, the subtlety differences between being here and there, and the conditioned ways in which we perceive accessibility. Through her work, Franziska keeps questioning normative modes of knowledge, production, including the ethics and accountability behind such processes. And here I borrow from Haraway work, situated knowledge, how to see, where to see from, what limits to vision, what to see for, whom to see with, who gets to have more than one point of view, who gets blinded, who wears blinders, who interprets the visual field, and what other sensory powers do we wish to cultivate beside vision. Franziska is known to often perform in physical spaces, in VR environments, working collaboratively with AI, or in distributed digital worlds such as Second Life. Remember Second Life? Well, 20 years on, and Second Life still has an appeal, and it seems to pull some weight. So all in all, Franziska and I are very different, and as you can imagine, we don't always agree, but we have a great deal of respect for each other, and I'm very lucky to call her a friend. I hope you will enjoy the multifaceted creative journeys you are about to hear.
In the multiplicities dance, the rhizome weaves, a clandestine ballet in the forest of leaves. Roots intertwine, the subterranean thread, multiplicities whispers, and shadows spread. The poet, a vessel, a manifold sea, echoes excels, a vast canopy. Rhizome's tendrils reach through the soul's abyss, multiplicity's chorus of whispered bliss. No linear journey, no singular trail, Rhizome's rebellion, an enigmatic tale. Branches bifurcate and chaotic flight, multiplicity's ballet, a dance in the night. In the echoes, of poets, the rhizome sighs, a reflection of truth by the spirit eyes. In the boundless garden of thoughts entwined, rhizome and art, in harmony bind.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This short introduction on multiplicities, which you have just heard, is going to be setting the tone for the next about 50 minutes. Can you hang on, boys? 50 minutes? The poem was completely generated by AI, including the German version and the Portuguese version, so beautifully read by Mathilde, and thank you for this very touching introduction. It was prompted to elicit a poetic output using the idea and the word multiplicities, yes, the title of my talk today. And it was prompted to be in the style of the Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa, and Mathilde has already mentioned my absolute dedication to this poem and to this poet and his thinking, and I will revisit his work in the sort of second part of my talk. However, the saxophone track you heard, alas, was not generated by AI. It was myself improvising, taken from a recording of almost 10 years ago with a Portuguese violinist, Carlos Zingaro, Pedro Rebelo on piano, and Ulrich Mitzlaff on cello. So why multiplicities, you may ask? I chose the concept of multiplicities as the most fitting, the most poignant term, as I think it describes the manifold, the diverse, the multiple and entangled journeys that my work has taken. As a saxophone player, a musician, an improviser, as an academic, as a person, and as a mother of two beautiful grown boys, men, I may say, and who are here today, and I thank you very much for your support. Multiplicities is a term that encapsulates my various trajectories, while embracing the different people whom I've had the fortune to work with and to learn from, to be inspired by, to be challenged by. Yes, difficult questions, Mathilde, you're right. We're always asking difficult questions. And many of them are in this room today. And I'm not just talking about staff and students, but also my friends and family, some of them online, I believe, mom and dad online, and my brother and sister. Hence, I had to do something in German to help you out. And there might even be a friend of ours tuning in from Australia. If she did manage to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, hi, Dorcas. The notion of multiplicities is inspired by many things, but not least by my encounters with thinkers, including the philosophers Edmund Husserl and Henry Bergson. But the thinking around multiplicities particularly started to sprout roots during my PhD, where I mixed and mingled with the ideas of some of the most forming or most inspiring thinkers, at least for me at the time, the French philosophers, and Mathilde referred to them briefly, Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. Their use of the rhizome metaphor, or the rhizomatic, has become a rather often cited, slightly hackneyed concept maybe these days. But in the 1980s, when the two French philosophers or thinkers had unearthed kind of this concept of the rhizome, they were digging deep into the soil to find to look towards biological processes, roots of plants and so on, and trees. And rhizome, as you can see on the slide here, is a term that is derived from the ancient Greek word and denotes a mass of roots. So similarly, in the way in which both of these philosophers, and in their probably most quoted works, Mille Plateaux, Thousand Plateaux, they think of the ways in which roots branch out into multiple directions, and particularly in non-hierarchical ways. And I very much feel that my music journey has taken lead from that horizontal way of working and thinking, and has been at the heart of my music and improvising practices. And hence the subtitle of the talk, if you remember, Roots and Horizontal Music Making. And very much I think of this in opposition to more binary ways of conceiving of our histories and cultures. So multiplicities or non-hierarchical ways of looking at the world allow us to see music making as an opportunity for being inspired by various influences, allowing multiple attractions in the same way that you might see roots or rhizomes constantly branch out, aiming to enrich themselves by sprawling and sprouting, extending outwards to see nourishment for continuous growth, and maybe having no identifiable, or at least for us or for me, trajectories. So the ideas of multiplicities has had important influences on my music making and my thinking and playing and improvisation practices for over 20 years. The concept of enabling multiple trajectories, thinking through different approaches to things, listening to diverse voices, what my then supervisor in Edinburgh, the architect and digital media theorist, Professor Richard Coyne, often referred to as looking sideways. I really liked that thinking of seeing things in unusual fashion he was talking about, by way of very much questioning conventional frameworks. And that was always at the time, and is still influential in my thinking about the way we interact with each other and how we make music together. Multiplicity is also a great way of thinking of being a flourishing academic, and let's see how much further I can push this rooting metaphor in the next 40 minutes. Being an academic, there's a lot of this having to wear a lot of the times manifold heads. It's a bit like this multi-headed Greek water monster that some of you might know, Hydra. We might be supervising students, writing papers, conference proposals, coming up with our next big funding idea, brainstorming in meetings, and of course continuously trying to improve our own practice. and in my case, not only continuing to play the saxophone and hoping to get better, but also to think wider developments in society. And artificial intelligence is an obvious one. And really thinking about how such societal developments might in turn affect our arts practices. In the next 40, 45 minutes, whatever's left, I will introduce you to some of my creative ideas informed by this notion of multiplicities. And I want to start with a more recent one of them. You might call it a sort of multiple, a copy, a digital twin, a doppelganger, or a cyborg maybe. So this is Donna, my deepfake, inspired, and by some of you will have already guessed, and if you've listened to Mathilde, she's inspired by the feminist cyborg scholar, the American Professor Donna Haraway, whose writings contributed greatly to the feminist narratives of the 20th century. So Donna is my virtual friend, and she appeared to me during 2022 when I was delving more deeply into AI, into artificial intelligence. And I was really trying to grapple with the sort of messy, possibly unknown, slightly uncomfortable and multiple realities of AI. And Donna came into my life from actually a deep sense of urgency, as many musicians and writers, artists, some of them I know in this room also, started to fear that AI might potentially replace some of our cultural labor. And well, it has actually done to some of us and to some degree. And from a starting point of thinking that if we humans want to stay in the game or future relevant, whatever you might want to call it, I thought that AI actually might be the best thing that happened to us or to me as a musician, as an improviser. Something that had, when it sort of arrived completely and topsy-turvy, turned all of us onto our listening ears. And I'm talking producers, musicians, writers, makers alike. And this sort of existential threat not only challenges our ideas of what music is, but who is making music, who is consuming it, what AI will do to us, or what we will do to it, or with it. So, Donna, I was thinking you could maybe introduce yourself and talk a little bit about yourself.
Oh, sure, okay. So, my name is Donna, and I am a multiple of Franziska, having been made with some of her features. Obviously, I have her voice, blue eyes and blonde hair, but hey, that's where our similarities end. I mean, look at how much more gorgeous and delightful I am.
Okay, this is really not about your looks. Maybe you could just tell us why you're here and, you know, be a bit more welcoming, seeing that you have all these lovely people.
I'm here. Oh, yes. Well,
Yes.
I don't
Why are you
actually have
here?
an answer to this, as I have not been imbued with a sense of self. I don't even know if I have an identity as such, and I definitely was not asked to be made.
Yeah, okay, Donna, that's true. I did not ask you for permission, and I am very sorry. But you have a body, and you have a voice, a gorgeous body, as you say, and you think, I think you think, so seeing that you're here in this room and look at all these lovely people, you could be a little more welcoming, don't you think, Donna? Just a wee bit.
Hi, lovely people. I'm indeed really happy to be here to talk to you and delighted that Franziska brought me into this world. And you know what? I actually made a short AI song using my own voice. It's a sort of trap song. You could play a bit, Franziska, if you want, before. I prefer to dissolve into the background for today to tend to some cyborg duties.
Yeah, I know. Thanks for reminding me, Donna, because she did actually write a really cool song. It's a trap song, and she was using her deepfake voice. It riffs on the word cyborg, very clever. So she composed this. You composed this? Oh, sorry, you're gone. Anyway, she composed this in 2022 using exclusively AI, and I thought that was very clever. I give you 1 minute, see if you like it. key change. Oh, so clever, yeah. The way that AI, though, back to some more serious matters, the way that AI brings up many questions and challenges, but also opportunities, I think, allows us to look at the ways in which AI might change our way of making music. And so back in 2020, when Donna arrived, I decided I wanted to be at the forefront of this AI development movement, and deciding very much how I want to integrate AI into my improvising practice. And at the time, my friend and one of the most inspiring AI artists I know, Glenn Marshall, if you're online, I know you're in the States making an AI film, as you do. He lives in East Belfast, just around the corner from me, so I'm very delighted. But he had taken me under his AI wings, and he said to me at the time, 2 years ago, you have to think AI. And I kind of had to think what he really meant. You have to think AI, he said. And to me, it seemed to imply to try and see, or to be in a way where you remove yourself from a more central position, or a central viewpoint of seeing the world, and you stop becoming the center. And you think AI, which implies grappling with what is in the data, what is in the machine, what is in the algorithms. And you might figure out how the AI understands us, or how the AI sees the world. And so I started with visual scores, where I used AI to generate animated visuals using a technique called text-to-image stable diffusion models. And these visuals were informed. That sounds like that's a screen reader. These visuals were informed by the musicians I was working with at the time and their relationship to their instruments, thinking about the idea of multiplicities, of having a doppelganger, having someone like Donna in my life, having several saxophones. You can probably see that in some of the visuals. I've just given you a bit of a flavor in the background. But then I went even further, and I enticed the machine and the computer to learn my own style of playing, so bear with me. In technical terms, we grandiosely refer to this as training a neural network. Right? I will not go into any boring details of what this actually means, but training data into the machine, or into the computer, into the algorithm. In this case, I was training my own style of playing, my own style of improvising, so that I could potentially have a musical dialogue, not just with someone as gorgeous as Donna, but having a musical dialogue with the computer. So basically, teaching the machine to play in my own style. I know, that sounds really egotistical, but so in training my own data, I found out a lot of things, and I somewhat felt that I became a little bit part of the algorithm. You kind of create the space where maybe human and machine step into a relational encounter. This does not mean that you glorify the machine in any way, but really taking a critical stance around how this training works, how data sets are trained, and what is being trained into data sets. So many programmers currently working in AI, they openly admit that this is somewhat a gray area, a sort of a ghost in the machine, people say. Nobody really knows what the data set or the model does once it's been trained. And all this touches upon very relevant discussions. It's far beyond my talk today, but it's around consent. Well, Donna said she was trained without consent, which is actually true. And authorship. It touches around discussions around bias, around inclusion. So I think just something to keep exploring, to keep coming back to. But I have implemented these neural networks, so my style of playing and working with a machine. I currently work together with an improviser and colleague and live coder called Federico Rubin, and we have performed using such AI neural networks in Stockholm, at the Cheltenham Science Festival, and recently at Exploratorium in Berlin. So allow me to share a short clip of one of the earlier AI works, a 2022 duo performance taking place here at SARC, for which I had created some of those visuals that you've just seen, but using a prompting technique I developed based on transferring styles of particular artists, so kind of Jackson Pollock or whatever you might want to use for your visuals. In the video, you can see myself and the incredible musician and improviser, London-based cellist Matthew Barley. And the video in the background is very personal to both of us. It's completely generated using AI, Stable Diffusion. And you might see some saxophone shapes, and you will see lots of water drops, because when you play the saxophone, sorry, I don't want to, disgust you here in the front row, but you tend to spit a lot. Well, you have to spit in order to get something out of the saxophone. So I'm going to give you two examples of, and you can see there was a really beautiful immersive setup here where we had screens all around us. So let me just get you a little bit of this. It's just a nice, beautiful one bit here where you can hear Matthew play. Just to give you a flavor, Donna wasn't the first virtual person I had worked with. Surprise, surprise, my academic career back in 2007 really began with what was then my first ever quite large Arts and Humanities Research Council grant to look at and research music performance in virtual worlds, and Mathilde referred to Second Life. And so this other person, this multiple or copy or avatar, as we called it back then, was a girl who, unlike me, owned a Gucci bag. I always wanted a Gucci bag, so I gave this avatar a Gucci bag. Actually, to the surprise, and I have to say, to slight horror of my friend, and I think Dorcas specifically, who might be listening in from Australia, but I was completely enthusiastic about this virtual girl because she had the ability to leave her virtual head at a virtual hairdresser, getting herself nice and pretty, while the rest of her virtual persona could teleport, fly around in the virtual environment called Second Life. And as Mathilde said, a VR platform that had emerged in 2000 and early 2000. So it meant I could kind of let her have her hair done, and I could do the research that I needed to do. It's the stuff that we would all like to do as academics, sometimes at least. But even worse, to my shock, and actually my real shock was that I had forgotten until I put together this lecture, my avatar name at the time, and this nicely dressed blonde girl, I had insanely named Sick Chick Sachertorte. Yeah, I don't know where my real head was at the time. It was one of those crazy times. Nothing to do with you boys, you were already born, so. But Queens might not want to hear this, but at the time I managed to use, legally may I say, our school's credit card to purchase a virtual island, which I owned for over 2 years, and along with a diverse group of people distributed over many geographical locations, including in the US, the inspiring Pauline Oliveros, may she rest in peace. We performed between real and virtual spaces. You can see here setup which was supposed to, we tried to rebuild this space, the Sonic Arts Research Center. You can see some of the bricks, you can see some screens, you can see loudspeakers like you see in this room. And it was a really interesting time to see how, if someone was to perform in here and you could move the sound around in this space, what would happen if you did the same in a virtual environment. And it was kind of early, it was over 24 years ago, 20 years ago. So these were kind of experimental things around sound and music and so on. But one of the things that Second Life allowed me to do was to work with a virtual orchestra, probably the only and first virtual orchestra called the Avatar Orchestra Metaverse, or AOM. Again, these were performers in different locations, and we produced a large collaborative performance entitled Rotating Brains, Beating Heart, because that's what it was, virtually rotating brains and a beating heart in the middle, and all of us flying around. There are too many musicians to mention who were part of this project because it was a major project, but it allowed me to collaborate with a rather famous and slightly crazy Australian artist called Stellark. You see him here in the front left, and he was using a third robotic arm for this performance. I know you might start thinking I'm a bit crazy, but yeah. Stellark, when I met him in 2010, it gets even better. He was in the early stages of having a cell-cultivated ear surgically attached to his left arm. This is what we do in this crazy building. A third ear, he was hoping that one day would allow him to listen. And in our collaboration in Second Life, Stellark performed with this third robotic arm. In a way, he was always interested in being multiple, being more than just himself, and a real poignant collaborator for me at the time. But making music with people who are not physically present in the same location, and I may need to remind you, this is almost 20 years ago, well before the pandemic, where all of a sudden it became kind of quite normal to have to, use a screen and internet connection to talk to your friends. But it was a really exciting and novel enterprise for us. We are thinking through issues of authorship resonance. So, for example, someone playing in a very reverberant church, someone might be in a concert space in Canada, someone might be playing from their bedroom in Brazil. And yes, even then we had people making music from their bedrooms, so this wasn't even new for us when it happened in the pandemic. But also around how do you synchronize, how do you play together when the network tends to throw what I might call a bit of a delay spanner into the work. So you can't really synchronize very easily because there's always delay, what we call kind of delay in the network. So there was a lot of things that we had to think through. But this seemingly smooth transition from making or performing music with people, for example, in Second Life, or with working with orchestras, for example, in Second Life, led to a larger project which was sitting in SARC, and we then called Network Performance. So we connected diverse musicians across the globe, and many of us here at SARC were really instrumental in experimenting with this type of performance at the time, trying new ways of notating music. Like, what does it mean? And some of you might know you write music on paper, but how does that work when you want to sync with someone who might be in Argentina, for example? So new ways of thinking about music notation. But also improvising in co-located fashions. We thought about dramaturgies, who's standing where. For example, we had a huge setup here where we had audiences projected onto the side, so you could be part of a larger audience. You could see people in Germany on one side and the audience in Austria at the time. And it was a real kind of immersive experience from an audience point of view. I remember people clapping together and looking. People in Hamburg are clapping too, and all this. But so this was kind of important for us to try, and we had this large EU project led by a very known institution in Paris called IRCAM, and it was very much a fertile meeting ground for multiple cultures and multiple styles of music. One of the concerts I fondly remember, or less fondly because it was 3 a.m. in the morning here. It was run from New York, and they needed to have an evening concert. It was quite internationally visible telematic concert. It was this Resonations concert, was a concert for peace, UN concert for peace. So I want to give you a short flavor of one of the concerts where 3 musicians improvise in 3 different spaces. So myself in the middle in Belfast, a clarinetist in Hamburg, and another saxophone player in Graz. We're improvising with a graphic score, so a music score that is slightly different in each of the locations. Again, that was sort of a thing we were trying to think about. Does the score need to be always exactly the same? So you will see these sort of flickering white circles, which was the score. You might think, how is that a score? But talk to me after. It does look like we're all in the same space, but we're not. It's just put together in this way. So this is a short excerpt. Because I want to move on to part 2, development, roots and absurdity. So I would be remiss if I didn't speak of multiplicities in the context of a writer, an inventor of different personas and identities, the Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa, who reveled in fragmented, multiple and disjointed words, worlds and ideas. He's one of those thinkers that moves fluidly between thoughts of self-loathing and self-exaltation, using words that at times seem manic depressive, filled with buckets of self-pity, while at the same time he's able to at least scratch the inner part of my soul and allows you to deeply look into your own mind and heart. So a rather extended chapter emerged from my obsession with Pessoa, entitled Manyness in Music Improvisation for the Routledge Handbook of Philosophy and Improvisation in the Arts. And the encounter with Pessoa was very much due to 2 important colleagues, Dr. Matilde Morelos and Professor Pedro Rubello, not only Portuguese themselves, but connoisseurs of Pessoa's writing. Pessoa allowed me to rethink approaches to music improvisation. His thoughts really enticed me to think about the self and the other, how we play and improvise, and indeed how we replay and re-improvise. Pessoa's plurality of thoughts and philosophies and his multiple identities and creation of different lives and fictional personas enabled me to connect and, at the time, the discourse of music improvisation and poetry. And Pessoa's thinking of multiplicities expressed, you can see a couple of these quotes by some of these personas that he invented. Ricardo Reis, one of them, saying, multiple lives live in each of us. And the German one is for my parents online. So and also I was reading in both Portuguese and in German and in English to see what the translations were doing. Álvaro de Campos saying, I'm more diverse than an arbitrary mass. I'm more manifold than the spontaneous universe. And in an absurd way, Pessoa and his ideas of multiplicities came back to me during lockdown. Having been forced back into online existence, I found myself digesting very much previous ideas of Second Life, of network performances, all this virtual stuff that we've been doing for 20 years. And this time I was immersed in Pessoa and his poem entitled Absurdity that Matilde already referred to. And this poem and the necessity for being at home led to a work during lockdown for 6 female collaborators, all of whom sent sounds from their respective lockdown places. We were using an app called Live Shout, something I had co-developed a few years prior with another AHRC, Arts and Humanities Research Council grant. And this app allows you to send basically sounds from your places using your mobile phone or your iPad or so on. And the lockdown work I poignantly entitled Absurdity. It connected these female collaborators from their respective homes. You had Ariana Stolfi in Brazil, Nella Brown in London, Anna Jambo in Sheffield, Maria Papadoumanoulaki in Crete, Maria Manoni in Palermo. It sounds very exotic, I know, but we were all in our houses. And Mathilde and I were reading excerpts from Pessoa's poem from our abode in South Belfast, physically separated, of course, different rooms. And we were combining all the sounds from all of our female collaborators, inspired by Pessoa's plurality of thoughts and philosophies, by his multiplicities, his fictionality, and his self-alienation. And it led to a performance that aimed to be absurd, dispersed, fragmented, and multiple. We performed this as part of Federico Visi's lockdown event entitled Physically Distant Telematic Performance in 2020. Now, you probably imagine what may this have sounded like, right? Someone sending wind sounds and cat sounds and all sorts of sounds from their home. But surprisingly, there's no recording of this performance. As is often the case with such multiple performances, where the music plays where you are and also the music sounds where you are not. It is absurd, I know. You can see from some of these short excerpts, and this is the last bit about Pessoa, the flavor was slightly depressing and probably how many of us felt at the time. A poem where Pessoa seems to suggest something to you, like go and buy a book. Sounds nice. In the same breath, he goes against that same offering, but don't bother reading it. Or go for a walk, but don't even have an interest in going. Or go to a concert, but don't bother even listening to the music. So it's quite absurd and depressing. So let me take you to something more gregarious. A Brazilian student-led samba band preparing for the carnival in Rio back in 2014. Yes, I was in Rio and loved every moment of it. So, part 3, recapitulation, growing cultures. And I know some of you music aficionados in this room may have been querying how my rather tepid reference to the musical sonata form in the bracketed subsections. So I had part 1 exposition, part 2 development, and part 3 recapitulation. I am a musician after all. How these are meaningfully introduced and progressed or recapped, and to which I'm afraid I have to tell you they're not. But the subtitle, Growing Cultures, has a meaning, and it has a really important meaning in my inquiries into multiplicities and the diversity of cultures in improvisation practices. So Brazil, my passionate musical interests into musical improvisation within different cultures, it was a curiosity in researching and improvising in and understanding the cross-fertilization and blossoming of improvisation cultures in contexts other than the UK. It led me to carry out 2 major ethnographic studies of improvisers living and playing in different countries. In 2014, this was in Brazil. I had a lovely Professor Servan Cook International Fellowship that allowed me to interview over 50 improvisers living and working in Brazil. And in 2016, it followed with another study in Portugal. And this CD was one of the blossoms. It's a CD called Barely Cool. Don't ask me which one am I. Have been asked many times. I have no idea. It was a crazy Brazilian graphic designer who designed this cover. I gave many workshops and live concerts in Brazil, but this one was one of the blossoms of the inquiries and it's a really good example of practice research, of inquiring through making. The CD was recorded at a really quite groovy venue, if you ever get the chance, called Audio Rebel. It's a groovy music recording studio in Rio de Janeiro and released on the PF Mentum label. I would like to offer you about 50 seconds of an excerpt, and this is Marcos Campello on guitar, and Renato Godoy on drums, and myself on the saxophone. If you are interested, you can find the interviews and writings of these projects on blogs that I still keep. They're called, they're entitled Improvisation in Brazil and Improvisation in Portugal. Again, very clever. But unlike the ever-evolving and continuously spreading and dispersing of roots, I'm going to, and you will be glad to hear, I will start to trim the unyielding sprouting of my slightly exasperating rooting metaphor with my final part. And not as much a coda, but really a highlight and a huge pride for me. Inclusive music research, performance without barriers. So this Queens-based research group, it's a research team I set up in 2015 when my then PhD student, Kuichi Samuels, investigated how we design musical instruments in more inclusive and accessible ways. Performance without barriers is one of my proudest achievements of being in academia. It has grown into a flourishing community of like-minded researchers. We now consist of postdocs, Alex, several PhD students, or now doctors, Dr. Damien Mills, Leo, James, visiting scholars, Juanita, and many external stakeholders who are part of our ongoing research projects. Having received numerous AHSC Marie Curie fellowships and the recognition by our own Vice Chancellor in 2020, the group dedicates itself to thinking in terms of multiplicity, horizontal working, open-mindedness, listening to diverse voices and abilities, and thinking together through how people with various abilities access music and musical instruments. The stance, passion, and energy of our group has led to radical rethinking of what a musical instrument is, what instruments may look like, how we access an instrument, especially with atypical body shapes, what an instrument might or can sound like. And in one of my HSC-funded projects called Virtual Reality Inclusive Music Makers in 2017, we collaborated with a professional chamber music group, the Hard Rain Soloist Ensemble, and we were in this beautiful building. Some of you may remember fondly the showcase we put on. You can see here a colorful display, which is indeed one of those different instruments and a new musical instrument implemented in virtual reality by Damien Mills at the time. And myself immersed in my own VR instrument. You just have to imagine what it looks like, because I can see it, but you can only look at me. And that's the thing with VR, right? But the work has led us to tour Germany and Switzerland, and I had the huge privilege to play in a duet with one of our musicians, Mary-Louise, where we were both using our newly designed virtual instruments. A lot of publications have come out of the group. They're too numerous to cite here, but if you might like a taster, one of them can be found in this edited journal of contemporary music review called Improvisation and Social Inclusion, which I co-edited, and I try and reflect on the meaning of improvising with others, hoping here very much to contribute to the discourse on who is or is not included when improvising together. Last year, as a group, we showcased some of our new instruments within a rather impressive large-scale project entitled Zoom Time Over and Out. Yes, this bottle had a meaning. This was a performance without barriers collaboration with musicians from Drake Music Northern Ireland, Brain Injury Matters, and the Derry-based ensemble Acoustronik. It involved the Ulster Orchestra, the University of Ulster, and was premiered at the Belfast International Arts Festival, and it ran as part of a Future Screens demonstrator project funded by the IHRC, and I was one of the co-investigators of it. It was covered on BBC, thanks to Damien, and ITV, so this was quite a highlight for us. And I would like to share about less than 2 minutes of an excerpt, which shows a little bit of the process, a tiny bit of the final outcome. Some of you may have been, I know some of you were at the concert, so hopefully you recall this. This is a very exciting project between Queen's University Belfast, creation by musicians from 2 inclusive music groups. One group is called Acoustrotic, a group of musicians based at Ulster University in Derry, a group that Professor Frank Lyons started many years ago. The other group of musicians is linked to Professor Franziska Schroeder's research group called Performance Without Barriers, a research team based at Queen's University in Belfast. In this incredible project, in Zoom time over and out, musicians are using specifically designed, new, inclusive digital musical instruments, but also an accessible long cane instrument. Further, you will see specifically created virtual environments and a visual accompaniment that Professor Paul Moore has created in collaboration with all the musicians. Zoom time over and out.
That's me for disrupted. Add to that serious economic damage, divisive social upheaval, and of course, the virus isn't gone.
I firmly believe that our research group's approach, working in horizontal ways of thinking in non-hierarchical ways, more akin to roots and rhizomes that constantly branch out, is key to our success. Music improvisation, which we explore from many angles in this group, has at its heart the ideas of questioning binary ways of thinking, favoring multiple trajectories, always intently listening to diverse voices, looking sideways, seeing and hearing things in maybe unusual fashion by ways of questioning conventional frameworks. And this is for me an essential way of understanding not only music making, but people, relationships, and ultimately organizations that we're all part of and in charge of shaping. I personally very much try to inject into our group this stance of generosity, kindness, adaptability, mutability, and intent listening, indeed a very essential skill for improvising musicians. And these are all essential drivers in the growth of the group. And I will decrescendo my inaugural lecture with a final thought on art and music's mutability, their adaptability and generosity, with a quote by the Scottish author, playwright, and journalist Ali Smith, who I've turned to many times for wisdom and insight. And Ali says about art and music that they will hold us at all our different ages, like they held all the people before us and will hold all the people after us, in an elasticity and with a generosity that allow for all our comings and goings. Because come, then go we will, and in that order. And before you do go, can I ask you to please give a very warm applause to our amazing technical team, Johnny, who had to do multiple tasks at the desk, the technical team behind the cameras, as well as to Maria, Mehan, and David at the front, and the team who beautifully and thoughtfully prepared some delightful dishes for us, and hopefully some refreshing drinks and some delicious delights. And you're all very welcome and invited to join us in the foyer. And with this, I thank you very much.